Okay, it's time to cut some mortises. Now, we've laid out with pencil our mortises. Now, again, these are 2 5/8, and in the last time we talked about the offset for the little door closures. Now, I've came in from the top and up from the bottom 3/8 of an inch. We don't want to run full length. We want to create our cheeks and our shoulders. This helps give us some strength. We're also going to do, now my posts are 1 7/8, so I'm going to do a 5/8 mortise. That would also work on a 1 3/4 post. I'm going to do a 5/8 mortise, and I'm going to do it 7/8 of an inch deep. Now, when you're laying out mortises, and in this case, what we're going to be using is just a simple bench top mortiser. It's something, probably one of the easier ways of doing mortises. Now the question is going to come up, could I use what's called a loose tenon? And for those who don't know, that's where we actually cut a mortise in both pieces, in both our post and our rail, and then we make a tenon that goes in between them and glues into both. Sure, you could. We're going to stick with a little bit more traditional means and do a regular mortise and tenon. We're actually going to peg ours, and we'll see more of that later. But one of the best ways of laying out a mortise is, rather than just use a pencil, is you want a cut edge. Let me explain. Oftentimes, even using a bench top mortise or whatever, sometimes you got to come back and clean up your edges a little bit. And in the next pie safe, when we look at some alternative ways of doing it, one of the ways we're going to be doing it is using a drill. A cut line gives you a definite, very definitive measuring point. You know, when you want things to really fit well, even the width of a pencil. That's the reason typically we will use a knife, or at best a 5mm mechanical pencil. Even those, like I said, that pencil line, you've got to decide, are you going to the outside or inside of it? A knife cut, that's pretty definitive. Now the other thing you're going to want to do is, no matter what technique you use, is try to have yourself a little scrap block for setup. Now, we talked about a knife. This is a marking gauge. You'll see a lot of marking gauges out here, and a lot of them will have a scratch point. I would beg to differ that what you want is a cut. You want a knife point. Now, one of the main reasons for that is when you cut it, and we have to come back and clean up with a chisel, that cut line gives us a place for our sharp chisel edge to set to make sure we're perfectly in line with where we need to be. Also, again, makes for a very definite measuring point. Now, when you make a cut line on something like this red oak that's got all this grain, well, you can't see it. Here's a tip. Now, could you use a combination square and something like an X-Acto knife or something? Sure. And you know, I'll tell you something else too, kind of funny. Well, it's not funny either. See these things? As we get older, there's two things happen. These don't work as well, and this gets bigger. Well, not necessarily. See this right here? This is emails. Set and typing. Anyway, we now have no question where we need to be. So when we go to set up our mortiser, we can line everything up. Now, depending on the mortise you've got as to how you set your depth and everything. If you want more information on setting up a mortise, while you're here out on YouTube or wherever you're at, we've got one out there and it's simply called Setting Up a Mortise. And we explain it in a lot more detail. So once you're set up, we're now ready to chop our mortises. Now here's the thing. On a benchtop mortiser like this, what you can run into, particularly when you start mortising the end of something, where you're going to get in a little bit of an issue is sometimes your hold up that's holding you tight against your fence is not necessarily going to be the best because it's pushing here and not here. This one's not contacting. Make sure you're down pretty good with your stop. That keeps your bit or your post from moving up as you're chopping the mortise. Now the other thing we're doing, we're using a 3/8 inch bit. One of the reasons is we're going to do it one way, then we're going to reverse it and do it the other. This guarantees us that that mortise is going to be dead in the center. Now, what if my mortise is not quite 5/8 or if it's a little more than 5/8? That's okay. Just be consistent because we can then adjust our tenon to fit the mortise. And I usually find fitting the tenon to the mortise is a whole lot easier than the other way around. But what I want to show you is if you seem to have an issue with this, maybe not wanting to walk a little bit, just a simple clamp or something to the fence until you get moving up till you engage your other stop is a good thing. You could also put a board in between here, but you want to stay tight to your fence. That's going to keep your line. Okay, let's cut some mortises. I want you to notice something. You see where my chips are doing this? Now I did this on purpose because I want to show you something. You're always better off on your chisel to have your exit point in the front. This makes your discharge of your chips easier. But make sure you always got that chisel straight. Having a little compressed air doesn't hurt anything. Just keep that up there. Okay, once we have our mortise cut, then we need to do a little cleanup. Make sure our top and bottom's clean. Make sure our edges at the very bottom are clean, and that everything is nice and clean and looking good down inside of here. And we have one mortise. Now, this mortise, because it's dead center, is based on the fact that all of our rails coming across are, again, the same thickness as our post. Now, what if we were using just some 7/8 stock for our cross rail? Then we're going to have to do the same thing we're going to have to do on the side. which is a little different setup. We'll have to look at that. But right here, again, we ran one way, came back, ran the other. That makes sure it's dead center. We got to do the rest of the post, and we're ready to then turn our attention to the sides. So we'll finish these, be right back. All right, now all the 4 posts, our front and back rails are now mortised all the way. So now I've got them laid out exactly how they're going to be. You know, orientation is really important. You know, you can put a mortise where you don't want one real quick. Now, I ain't going to tell you how I know that, but I've heard it can happen. Smart, you know, when this is a pie safe, think about it. This is going to become our left front, our right front, left rear, right rear. So what we want to do, basically what's going to happen is the side pieces are going to go right in between here to create the sides. And so that I don't confuse myself or you, I'm simply going to mark everything with some chalk. Now, those are the sides that's going to be mortised, but I'm even going to go a little further. I need to mortise on this edge, this edge, this edge, and that edge. So that gives me a visual reference of where everything is going to go. Now, I need to do the story, if you will, for the sides. Now, we've talked about that. Let me get our prop up here. Okay. Where we got to go now is we've got 5 inches, 2.5, 2.5, and 5.5. Now let's look real carefully at something. If you look inside of here, we're going to have to put a rabbet, the top and the bottom of the center pieces, and then the bottom of the top piece, and the top of the bottom. Did you get that? The reason for that, that's where our 10 is going to sit. So, when we do that, we have to compensate and be sure we don't put our mortises too far up into our post. So now this rabbet's going to be a 1/2 inch and a 1/2 inch, top and bottom. So that means that we're only, and it's 2.5 inches, so that means we only have 1.5 inches in here. So I want about 1.25 inches centered in this 1.5 inch mortise, 1.5 inches from top to bottom. Because I don't want to get in here, I don't want to have that mortise exposed. Here, again, I'm going to have to treat the mortise based upon the width of our pieces without the rabbet. So this is 5, so we're going to treat this as 4.5. This is 5.5, we'll treat it as 5. So now I know that sounds a little confusing, but when we lay it out, and learning to lay it out and do your stories is a very, very important part of not making mistakes. Now, before I go much further, what happens if you cut a mortise in the wrong place? The easiest way to deal with it is simply to cut you a plug out of wood and put it in. If you just messed up and the mortise is going to be going in the same place and you got it a little too big or whatever, man, I'm going to hear about this one. Try a little auto body filler. And before you slam me too hard, give it a shot. It really, really works well. And I tell you what, restorers out here and people repairing antiques and whatever, they use it constant. It really works well with wood. Okay, now it's time to lay out for our side mortises. So let's just do the same story. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to set here so you can see it. And I've got a rigid device here I can measure pretty easily. I'm going to do it in the hole, meaning we're calling for 5 inches. Then we're going to go for 9 inches. Then 2.5 inches. 9 inches again. Two and a half. Another 9. Then a 5.5. All right, I'm going to draw them in. Now, we talked about that 1/2 inch rabbet. So what we're going to do is we're simply going to come back and come inside a 1/2 inch. But like I said, we don't want to go full width. So on the center ones, instead of coming in a 1/2, I'm going to come in 5/8. So I just go come in 5/8, 5/8, and that's going to be my mortise area. Same here. On the top up here, I'm going to go with the same 3/8 that we did on the side. From the top of what will be the mortise to the top of the post. When I get to the bottom down here, what I want to do is the same 3/8, but I got to remember the 1/2. So a 1/2 plus 3/8 is 7/8. So I want to come in 7/8 of an inch. Now, you know, I could actually cheat that down a little bit. I think I'm going to. I don't think I want that much space. The top of the post, yes. But I think what I'm going to do is, if I'm a 1/2 inch, I'm just going to come up 5/8. That'll give us plenty of tenon in there and make it stronger. So this in here is going to be our mortise area, right there, between those two lines. Same here, same here. Now, the top of this one, we have the exact same thing, except reverse from the top. So I'm going to drop in 5/8 from the bottom down, or from what is the bottom of it, the bottom rail down 5/8, and then on the bottom I'm coming up 3. And this is going to be my mortise area. Now you notice the chalk on this side. So I know this is the side I'm going to be mortising. Again, simply now you can lay your post up and this is your story. And you can transfer it all over to the other post. Now I have to set my mortise up. Now that's one of the reasons I like processing my wood to thickness first. Now, I'm 7/8. Like I said, you may be 3/4 wherever. But here's what I did. I took my marking gauge and I set it up to where when I make a mark, even that knife line, which is hard to see on camera, but I'm dead on the money. I'm right dead in the center of what's going to be my rails. Now let's go over to the mortiser. We're using a little different mortiser this time, so let's go take a look. Okay, now I've got the big mortiser out. And simply the reason is that, again, I told you, we're a woodworking shop. That's how we make a living. And not taking anything away from the bench mortisers. They do great. But you know, we're doing 3 of these pie safes, and so sometimes you just kind of want to move along just a little faster. So let's take a look. But what I got to do, same thing. Now what I'm going to do now is my objective is to get this mortise where it will be the dead center of my 7/8 stock. I've already taken my marking gauge and determined exactly what's dead center. So I'm going to mark it again. Now you're not going to be able to see this line very well on camera, but I can. Simply what I'm going to do is put it in the mortiser, and I'm going to line my back edge of that chisel right with that line. I mean the center of that chisel. I said the back edge. I want to put this, if you look at a mortise and chisel, here's a big one. We can see this one. It's simply a chisel with a bit in it. But we got that brad point dead in the center of that drill bit. I'm going to put that point right on that line. That's what I want, right on that line. And that's going to position my chisel dead center, taking equal off each side. Okay, now I got to set my depth. And again, we're going to do 7/8 on these. So we'll set the depth, do some test cuts, we'll be ready to mortise. All right, we've done our test and I've set up and I double checked my depth. Now one thing I forgot to mention. I'm old and I got a cold. Sorry. Some of y'all know how that is. Maybe not the cold thing, but anyway. I switched chisels. I've got a 5/16. And the reason is I don't want this outer wall to get too thin. So right now, that's going to give me just a little bit over 1/4. And that's the closest we're going to measure it. I ain't counting them 30 seconds, you hear? I centered it up on that line and it's doing good. I'm the same distance from that line both sides. That'll work. Now, you know, if we get, well, I'll show you when we do the tenon, okay? You can actually do a little offset on it if you want to, but this is just kind of a quick, easier way of doing it. All right. I'm going to set this bad boy in here and we're going to cut some mortises. Now, you notice something. I'm not trying to take a full chisel bite, but it's taking about little half bites. It kind of helps keep that the sides of it clean, and it helps to clean that bottom a little bit more. Now, somebody's going to ask if this is a good area for a dual tenon, meaning that we could have done part of a tenon here, skipped a space, and part of a tenon. Yeah, you can. Perfectly doable. And that does keep you from removing quite as much material from the post. But we haven't lost, we've got plenty of material here in these posts. And, you know, with the modern day adhesives, when this joint goes together, you know, modern day adhesive, they don't glue, they weld. I mean, they just literally, plus we're going to be pegging it. It ain't going nowhere. Now, again, I'm not promoting anything, but you see the differences in the mortise. One's just a little bit swifter than the other. But they both do a very good job. And then you got that economic thing. That's the one. Big difference. But like I said, you know, my world and your world is often too different. In my world, I got to get them done pretty quick. And in case you're wondering, yeah, we got some stuff, we got some things in here that we can do them faster than this, but that's not what this is about. This is about doing it so that the average guy or the beginning woodworker understands and can achieve the same results. Also good for biceps and triceps, pecs, and all them good muscles. All right. Little chisel cleanup. And we'll be ready to start looking at some tenons. Okay, so we're going to finish mortising these. Then it's them tenons. All right, before we get to these tenons, I want to talk about an alternative method for cutting the mortises. Now, I think I've mentioned, and if not, I'll say it again. You know, a router is probably a really good way of cutting mortises. Fast, effective, and efficient. But again, and there's many jigs and there's many things out here designed to do that. But again, we're kind of keeping this in the 101 thing. As these series continue, we will look at different alternatives. But we want to start at the basics. So what I've done is, just for visual clarity, I put the tape on and I've taken my marking gauge and I've cut what would be a mortise. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to the drill press and we're going to drill it out best we can, and then we're going to chisel it. Now, if you don't have a drill press, you can certainly use something like just a brad point drill bit with a stop for your depth. The drill press does make it easier, and you want some good chisels. So let's just simply take a look at how we do it. And I will tell you this much. I've cut a lot of mortises this way, so it works pretty well. A little slow, but it works good. Okay, this is really simple. What I've got a 5/8 mortise, but I've got a 1/2 inch drill bit. I don't want to try to get perfect with the drill bit. Now in this case, I'm using a Forstner bit because it drills and cuts a nice flat bottom, something that will help us. Okay, what the drill press has done, or drilling it, is it has established, number one, it's removed most of the material, and the second thing is it's established our depth. So that's a big help. Now, earlier we talked about this cut line that was made with the marking gauge. That's what makes it so neat, is that, you know, when you get down to your fine detail, you just want to pare this away. Just remove the waste. And with a good sharp chisel, it comes off pretty easily. When you get to doing the final detail, that's where that chisel will set in that knife mark and allow you to get a nice, clean, straight line. Again, the one thing that people do when they're chiseling something is they try to take off too much. Sneak up on it. Ease into it. Kind of whittle it away. Don't try to take big hunks. When you get to your corners in here, be very, very careful, particularly up here at this top. If you get in here and you start chiseling and using it as a pry, you can actually chip the top of this out. So go easy. The best way, again, to do it is simply nibble away at it. Don't try to take off too much. Now you notice what I'm doing. I went forward. I didn't come back. I don't want to take a chance. But the more I whittle, the closer I'm going to get to my desired line. Like I said, it takes a little bit, but it's certainly not difficult. Now, one of the problems guys have, particularly new guys, until you get accustomed to a chisel and used to being able to hold it vertical and whatever, and we want to keep those sides nice and straight. Here's a little trick that'll help you. You can see all we have here is just a scrap piece of MDF, and we're going to clamp it to our leg. Then I've got another scrap that is the thickness of my side, right here. In this case, 5/8. So all I'm going to do is clamp it in place. Now what this gives me is this gives me a perfect guide to true up my sides. Works pretty nice. Kind of takes the guesswork out. Kind of an automatic hand chisel straightener guide thing. Can we see in here? See how we are right dead on the line and how nice and clean the sides are, and they're vertical. Now, in the case of, this is a bigger one, but what about these little 5/16 mortises we did in the posts? No problem, just use a 1/4" drill bit. That's all there is to it. Again, take your time. You know, I told you when we were doing we was using the big Powermatic mortiser, that in my world you have to do things pretty quick. And that's true, you know. But I don't know, there's something about getting in here with a chisel and a hammer, or a mallet rather, and chiseling these things out that, well, if you're a woodworker, it's just a lot of fun. You know, sit down, you know, get your stool and sit down on your bench and sit there and chisel them things out. And when it's all said and done and you're able to stand back and look at it and say, wow, I built that. Pretty neat. Okay, next, mortises.